I never thought I'd feel so utterly alone in my own home. The night my daughter came home crying, I saw the bruises, bright purple fingerprints etched painfully on her pale neck. Just below, glinting cruelly in the dim New York apartment light, was my ruby necklace, the necklace he'd stolen from me months ago. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share, and if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and I'm 73 years old. I've lived in the same cramped Queens apartment for 45 years, watching the neighborhood change through my kitchen window. Every morning, I wake up at 5:30 to the sound of garbage trucks grinding their way down Northern Boulevard. The walls are thin here, paper thin, and I can hear Mrs. Chen next door shuffling around in her slippers, making tea just like I do. That Tuesday night in October, the night everything changed, I was sitting at my wobbly kitchen table, staring at a stack of unpaid bills. The fluorescent light above flickered like a dying heartbeat, casting harsh shadows across my weathered hands. I'd spent the day cleaning houses in Manhattan for $70, barely enough to cover groceries, let alone the electric bill that kept climbing every month. The apartment smelled like yesterday's cabbage soup and the faint trace of cigarettes that seemed permanently embedded in these old walls. 20 years since Harold left, and I could still smell his Marlboro Reds in the bathroom corners. Some ghosts never leave, no matter how hard you scrub. I was counting the crumpled 20s in my purse when I heard Sarah's key in the lock. My daughter, my beautiful 45-year-old daughter, stumbling through the door at 10:30 at night. But something was wrong. The way she held herself, hunched and trembling, made my stomach drop like I was falling down an elevator shaft. "Mama," she whispered, and her voice cracked like thin ice. When she stepped into the kitchen light, I saw them. Purple bruises, shaped exactly like fingers, wrapped around her throat like some sick necklace. But it wasn't just the bruises that made me gasp and drop my coffee cup, watching it shatter into 100 pieces on the linoleum floor. It was my ruby necklace hanging around her neck. My grandmother's ruby necklace, the one Harold took when he cleared out our safe deposit box 3 months ago. The one he claimed was joint property, even though it had been in my family for 4 generations. The one that disappeared along with $12,000 from our shared savings account, money I'd scraped together from decades of cleaning toilets and washing dishes. "Sarah," I breathed, reaching toward her neck. "Where did you get that?" She flinched away from my touch, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Shame. Deep, bone-crushing shame that reminded me of myself in those final months with Harold, when his fists started talking louder than his words ever did. "He gave it to me," she whispered. "Said it was a family heirloom. Said it belonged to someone who mattered." Someone who mattered. The words hit me like a slap across the face. Harold had given my daughter my own grandmother's necklace, stolen from me, and somehow convinced her she was worthy of wearing what I was not. Let me tell you something about my life, about the 47 years I spent being the woman who always said yes, the woman who believed that love meant sacrifice, that being a mother meant disappearing piece by piece until there was nothing left but an echo of who you used to be. I married Harold when I was 26, back when Queens still felt like a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. He was a construction foreman then, broad-shouldered and confident, with hands that could build anything and a smile that made me believe I was the luckiest woman in New York City. Our first apartment was a railroad flat on 38th Avenue, so narrow you could touch both walls if you spread your arms wide. But it was ours. I painted the kitchen yellow, hung lace curtains I'd sewn myself, and dreamed of filling those small rooms with children and laughter. Sarah came first in 1978, 23 hours of labor in Elmhurst Hospital, and when they placed her in my arms, I thought my heart might burst from the sheer weight of love. Harold cried when he held her, actual tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "She's perfect, Maggie," he whispered. "Just perfect." Michael followed 2 years later, then Jennifer in 1983. 3 beautiful children who turned our tiny apartment into a circus of toys and laughter and barely controlled chaos. I loved every exhausting minute of it. The sleepless nights, the chickenpox quarantines, the homework battles, the scraped knees that required magical kisses to heal. Harold worked long hours, coming home covered in concrete dust and smelling like sweat and machinery. I took a job at the elementary school on Roosevelt Avenue, working in the cafeteria from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, then rushing home to be there when the kids got off the bus. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Or at least I thought we were. The first crack appeared when Sarah turned 16. She started dating a boy from school, sweet kid named Tommy, who played varsity baseball and brought me flowers every time he picked her up. Harmless teenage romance, the kind that makes a mother smile and remember her own first love. But Harold saw it differently. "She's too young," he'd mutter over dinner, stabbing his meatloaf like it had personally offended him. "That boy's got one thing on his mind, and it ain't holding hands." When I suggested that maybe we should trust Sarah's judgment, that maybe teenage dating was normal and healthy, Harold's face darkened in a way I'd never seen before. "Don't tell me how to raise my daughter," he snapped. "You spoil her. Make her think she's some kind of princess who can do whatever she wants." The word "my" stuck in my chest like a splinter. My daughter. As if I hadn't carried her for 9 months, hadn't nursed her through every fever and nightmare, hadn't been the one to teach her how to braid her hair and believe in herself. That night, Harold waited up until Sarah came home from a movie with Tommy. When she walked through the door, laughing and glowing with that particular happiness that only comes from being 16 and in love, he was waiting like a storm cloud. "You're grounded," he announced. "No more dates, no more staying out past 8 o'clock. No more of this nonsense." Sarah's face crumpled. "But Daddy, why? I didn't do anything wrong." "Because I said so. Because while you're living under my roof, you'll follow my rules." I watched my daughter's light dim, watched her shoulders slump in defeat, and I felt something harden in my chest. But I didn't say anything. I told myself it was just Harold being protective, just a father looking out for his little girl. I should have known better. The pattern started slowly, so gradually that I didn't recognize it until it had wrapped around our family like invisible chains. Harold's rules became law, his moods the weather that determined whether we'd have sunshine or storms. Sarah stopped bringing friends home. Michael started spending more time at the library, any excuse to stay away from the tension that seemed to follow Harold through every room. And me? I became the buffer, the translator, the woman who made excuses and smoothed over rough edges and did whatever it took to keep the peace. "Your father's just stressed about work," I'd tell the kids when Harold exploded over forgotten chores or poor grades. "You know how hard he works for this family. He loves you," I'd whisper to Sarah when Harold's criticism made her cry. "He just doesn't know how to show it. Give him space," I'd tell Michael when Harold ignored him for days after some minor infraction. "He'll come around." I became an expert at reading Harold's moods, at predicting which version of him would walk through the door each evening. There was tired Harold, who just wanted dinner and television and to be left alone. There was angry Harold, who found fault with everything and everyone, whose voice could fill our small apartment with tension thick enough to choke on. And occasionally, rarely, there was sweet Harold, the man I'd married, who'd bring home flowers and tell jokes and make us all remember why we loved him. I lived for those glimpses of sweet Harold. They were like raindrops in a drought, precious and fleeting, just enough to make me believe that the man I'd fallen in love with was still in there somewhere, just buried under layers of stress and responsibility and whatever darkness had started growing in his heart. The first time Harold hit me, Sarah was 17 and getting ready for prom. She'd found a beautiful blue dress at a thrift shop in Flushing, and I'd spent weeks altering it to fit her perfectly. She looked like a princess, our Sarah, with her dark hair swept up and her grandmother's pearl earrings catching the light. Harold came home late that night, smelling like beer and failure. His construction company had lost a big contract, and he'd been drinking his disappointment at Murphy's Tavern down on Northern Boulevard. "How much did all this cost?" he demanded, gesturing at Sarah's dress, her shoes, the corsage her date had brought. "Not much," I said quietly, hoping to avoid a scene. "I altered the dress myself. The shoes were on sale. Everything costs money," Harold slurred, swaying slightly on his feet. "Money we don't have for this princess crap." Sarah's face flushed red. "It's my prom, Dad. It's important to me." "Important?" Harold's voice rose to a roar. You know what's important? Paying the rent? Buying groceries? Not throwing money away on some fairy tale dance. That's when I made my mistake. I stepped between them, put my hand on Harold's chest, tried to calm him down the way I'd done 100 times before. Harold, please! She's only 17 once. Let her have this. His hand came up faster than I could duck. The slap echoed through our small kitchen like a gunshot, leaving my cheek burning and my ears ringing. Sarah screamed. Michael, who'd been watching from the doorway, ran to his room and slammed the door. I touched my cheek with trembling fingers, tasting blood where my teeth had cut my lip. Harold stared at his own hand, like it belonged to someone else, his face cycling through surprise, guilt, and then something worse, justification. Look what you made me do, he whispered. If you hadn't pushed me, if you'd just listened, and God help me, I believed him. Standing there in my kitchen with my daughter crying behind me and my face throbbing with pain, I believed it was my fault. I'd pushed too hard, spoken up when I should have stayed quiet, forgotten my place in the careful ecosystem we'd built around Harold's temper. I'm sorry, I heard myself say. I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. Sarah left for prom that night with tears in her eyes and concealer covering the bruise on my cheek. When she got home at midnight, she found me sitting at the kitchen table with an ice pack pressed to my face. Harold passed out drunk on the couch. Mom, she whispered, sliding into the chair beside me. Mom, this isn't right. I couldn't look at her, couldn't bear to see the disappointment and fear in her eyes. It's fine, sweetheart. It was just a misunderstanding. Your father's under a lot of stress. He hit you. The words hung in the air between us like a confession. 3 simple words that changed everything and nothing at the same time. It won't happen again, I said, though we both knew I was lying. But it did happen again. Not every day, not even every week, but often enough that I learned to flinch when Harold moved too quickly. Often enough that the children learned to disappear when they heard his key in the lock and his footsteps were too heavy on the stairs. I started keeping a small makeup compact in my purse, learning to cover bruises with foundation and concealer. I got good at explaining away split lips and black eyes. I fell down the stairs, walked into a door, slipped in the bathtub. The lies came so easily that sometimes I almost believed them myself. The worst part wasn't the physical pain. Bruises heal, cuts fade, bones mend. The worst part was watching my children learn to be afraid in their own home, watching Sarah's light dim a little more each day, watching Michael build walls around himself so thick that sometimes I couldn't find the little boy who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories, watching Jennifer, my baby, learn to be invisible, to move through the apartment like a ghost so she wouldn't accidentally trigger Harold's rage. I told myself I was protecting them by staying, that a broken home was worse than a violent one. That love meant sacrifice, and if I could just be better, calmer, more careful, Harold would go back to being the man I'd married. 23 years. 23 years of walking on eggshells and making excuses and believing that somehow, someday, things would get better. They didn't get better. They got worse. Harold's drinking increased after he lost his job in the early 2000s recession. Construction work dried up, and companies weren't hiring 55-year-old foremen with bad knees and alcohol on their breath. He started spending his days at Murphy's Tavern, coming home meaner and drunker with each passing month. That's when he discovered our joint savings account. I'd been putting money away for years, $20 or $30 at a time, skimmed from grocery money and birthday gifts, and the small salary I made working at the school. It wasn't much, maybe $3,000 total, but it was mine, my security blanket, my escape fund, though I never admitted that's what it was, not even to myself. Harold found the bank statements while going through our papers, looking for something to blame for our financial struggles. When he confronted me, holding the statements like evidence in a trial, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. What the hell is this? He demanded. Just savings, I said quietly, for emergencies. Emergencies? His laugh was bitter and sharp. We're living in an emergency, Margaret, and you're hiding money from me like I'm some kind of stranger. I wasn't hiding it. It's our joint account. Our account that you never told me about. Our money that you've been sneaking away while I'm out looking for work." The irony was suffocating. Harold hadn't looked for work in 6 months. He'd given up, choosing to drown his failures in beer and bourbon while I worked double shifts at the school cafeteria and cleaned houses on weekends to keep us afloat. That night, Harold emptied the account. $3,000, gone in one trip to the bank. When I asked what he'd done with the money, he laughed. "Invested it," he said, "in liquid assets." The liquid assets turned out to be a 3-day bender that ended with Harold passed out on Murphy's bathroom floor and our rent 2 months behind. But the money wasn't the worst thing he took from me. That came later. My grandmother's ruby necklace had been the one constant in my life, the one thing that connected me to the woman who'd raised me after my mother died. Grandma Rose had worn it to her wedding in 1924, had passed it down to my mother, who'd given it to me on my 18th birthday with tears in her eyes. "This necklace has been in our family for 4 generations, she'd whispered, fastening the clasp around my neck with trembling fingers. "Someday, you'll give it to your daughter, and she'll give it to hers. It's not just jewelry, Margaret. It's our history, our strength." I'd worn it on my wedding day to each of my children's graduations, to every milestone and celebration that mattered. It wasn't worth a fortune, maybe $3,000 if you found the right buyer, but its value couldn't be measured in dollars. It was love made tangible, resilience passed down through generations of strong women who'd survived wars and poverty and loss. Harold knew all this. He'd heard the stories, seen me wear the necklace with such pride and reverence, which made what he did next all the more devastating. I came home from work one day to find our safe deposit box key on the kitchen table, and Harold sitting beside it with the expression I'd never seen before, cold satisfaction mixed with something that looked almost like revenge. "I had to make some financial decisions," he said, without looking up from his beer. My blood turned to ice. "What kind of decisions?" "The kind that puts food on this table and keeps a roof over our heads." I ran to the bedroom, to the small jewelry box where I kept my most precious things. Empty. The necklace was gone, along with my mother's wedding ring and the pearl earrings that had been a graduation gift from my parents. "Where are they?" I whispered, though I already knew. "Sold them?" Harold said simply. "Got $800 for the lot. Should hold us over for a couple of weeks." $800. 4 generations of family history, sold to a pawn shop in Queens for less than our monthly grocery bill. I felt something break inside me that day. Not just my heart. I'd grown used to that particular pain. Something deeper. Something that had been holding me together through 25 years of marriage, through decades of broken promises and broken bones and broken dreams. For the first time since Sarah's prom night, I fought back. "You had no right," I said, and my voice was stronger than I'd heard it in years. "Those weren't yours to sell." Harold's face darkened. "Everything in this house belongs to both of us. That's what marriage means, Margaret. What's yours is mine, and what's mine is mine." "My grandmother's necklace." "Your grandmother's dead," Harold interrupted, standing up so fast his chair fell backward. "She's been dead for 20 years. You think she cares about some rocks and metal?" He was wrong about that. Grandma Rose had been dead for 30 years, not 20. But I didn't correct him. I was too busy trying to breathe around the weight of loss that was crushing my chest. That night, I called every pawn shop in Queens, begging them to hold my jewelry if someone brought it in. I offered to pay double, triple what Harold had received, but it was too late. The necklace was gone, sold to some stranger who would never know its story, never understand what it meant. I cried for 3 days straight, not the careful, quiet tears I'd learned to shed so I wouldn't upset anyone, but deep, wailing sobs that came from a place I'd forgotten existed. Sarah found me on the 3rd day, curled up on my bed with Grandma Rose's empty jewelry box clutched against my chest. "Mom," she said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Mom, I'm so sorry." "It's gone," I whispered. "Everything's gone." Sarah's hand found mine in the darkness. "Not everything. I'm still here. Michael and Jennifer are still here. We love you, Mom. That can't be sold or lost or stolen." I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe that love was enough, that family bonds were stronger than the slow poison that had been seeping through our lives for decades. But even as Sarah held me, Even as she promised that things would get better, I couldn't shake the feeling that Harold had stolen more than just my jewelry. He'd stolen my history, my identity, my connection to the strong women who'd come before me. Without that necklace, I felt untethered, like I was floating through my own life without any anchor to hold me steady. The children started leaving soon after that. Sarah got married at 23 to a man named David who worked in construction like Harold, but treated her with the kind of gentle respect I'd almost forgotten existed. Michael joined the army and got stationed in California, as far from Queens as he could manage. Jennifer finished college and moved to Boston for a job with a marketing firm. One by one, they built lives that didn't include the apartment on Northern Boulevard, didn't include the tension and fear that had shaped their childhoods. I was proud of them for escaping, even as their absence left me feeling more isolated than ever. Harold and I rattled around in the same space that had once been too small for our growing family, but now felt cavernous and empty. He found occasional work, day labor jobs that paid cash and kept him busy enough to stay out of Murphy's Tavern during the daytime. But the drinking continued, and with it, the unpredictable moods that kept me walking on eggshells. The physical violence had mostly stopped, not because Harold had found God or sobriety, but because I'd learned to be invisible. I spoke only when spoken to, agreed with everything he said, anticipated his needs before he could voice them. I'd become a ghost in my own life, haunting the rooms where I'd once been vibrant and strong. But ghosts, I learned, can be surprisingly resilient. The first hint that my grandmother's necklace might not be lost forever came on a rainy Thursday in March. Sarah called me at work, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't identify. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." My heart started racing. Sarah only used that tone when something was seriously wrong. "What is it, sweetheart? Did Dad really inherit jewelry from his side of the family? Something with rubies?" The blood drained from my face. "What are you talking about?" "David's been seeing this woman," Sarah said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "Her name is Patricia. She's not much older than me, Mom. And yesterday I saw her wearing a necklace that looked exactly like Grandma Rose's." The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the cafeteria floor. Mrs. Rodriguez, who worked the serving line with me, looked over with concern, but I couldn't form words to explain what was happening. Sarah was still talking when I picked up the phone, said David gave it to her, said it was a family heirloom from his grandmother. But Mom, I remembered Grandma Rose's necklace. I remembered how you used to let me try it on when I was little, how you'd tell me stories about all the strong women who wore it before me. David, Sarah's husband David, the man I'd welcomed into our family, the man who'd promised to love and protect my daughter, was cheating on her. And somehow, he'd gotten his hands on my grandmother's necklace. The pieces started clicking together in my mind like a jigsaw puzzle from hell. Harold hadn't sold the necklace to a pawn shop. He'd given it to David, probably as payment for some debt or favor. And David, instead of treasuring this family heirloom or returning it to its rightful owner, had given it to his mistress. "Sarah," I said carefully, "where did you see this woman?" "At the mall in Elmhurst. She was with David, and they were holding hands, Mom, laughing like teenagers. And she was wearing our necklace like it was nothing, like it was just some pretty bauble he'd picked up at Macy's." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of betrayal settle in my chest. But this time, it wasn't just my heart breaking, it was Sarah's too, and that made everything 1,000 times worse. "Did you confront them?" "I couldn't," Sarah whispered. "I just stood there like an idiot, watching my husband parade his girlfriend around wearing my great-grandmother's jewelry. I felt so stupid, Mom, so humiliated." "You're not stupid," I said fiercely. "You're not the one who should feel ashamed." But even as I said the words, I knew how hollow they sounded. Shame doesn't follow logic or fairness. It settles into your bones regardless of whether you've done anything wrong, and it stays there like an infection that won't heal. That night, I confronted Harold about the necklace. He was watching television, a beer in one hand and the remote in the other, completely absorbed in some cop show where the good guys always won, and justice was served in nice, neat one-hour packages. "You gave my necklace to David," I said. Harold didn't look away from the screen. "I don't know what you're talking about. My grandmother's necklace. You didn't sell it to a pawn shop. You gave it to our son-in-law. Prove it. Those two words hit me like a physical blow. Not denial, not explanation, just a flat challenge, delivered with the kind of casual cruelty that Harold had perfected over our decades together. Why? I whispered. Why would you do that? Harold finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes was worse than anger or guilt. It was indifference. Complete, soul-crushing indifference. David needed a favor, Harold said simply. I helped him out. It wasn't yours to give. Says who? Harold reached for another beer from the cooler beside his chair. Everything we own is community property, Margaret. That's how marriage works. That necklace was my family's history, and now it's serving a purpose. David's happy. I've settled a debt. Everybody wins. Everybody? I could hear my voice rising, could feel 30 years of suppressed rage building in my chest like steam in a pressure cooker. What about Sarah? What about me? Harold shrugged. Sarah's a big girl. She'll figure it out. Figure it out. As if discovering your husband's infidelity was some kind of math problem to be solved. As if betrayal was just another life skill to be mastered. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, to break every dish in the kitchen, to shatter Harold's wall of indifference with the force of my fury. Instead, I stood there in our living room, surrounded by 40 years of shared memories and accumulated resentments, and felt something inside me quietly die. Not love, that had been fading for years, eroded by countless small cruelties and casual dismissals. What died that night was hope, the stubborn, irrational belief that somehow, someday, Harold would remember the man he used to be and find his way back to the person I'd fallen in love with. That man was gone, if he'd ever really existed at all. What remained was this stranger who could trade away 4 generations of family history without a second thought, who could orchestrate his own daughter's heartbreak with the casual efficiency of someone balancing a checkbook. I went to bed that night, knowing that my marriage was over. Not legally. That would take months of lawyers and paperwork and division of assets we barely had. But emotionally, spiritually, it was finished. Harold had finally pushed me past the point of no return, had shown me exactly how little our family meant to him, but I wasn't prepared for what happened next. The phone call came at 2:30 in the morning, jarring me from the first deep sleep I'd had in weeks. Sarah's voice was barely recognizable, thick with tears and something else. Fear. Mom, I need you to come over. Now. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Just come, please. I threw on the first clothes I could find and took the subway to Sarah's apartment in Forest Hills, my heart pounding with every click of the wheels on the tracks. The ride that usually took 20 minutes felt like hours, and by the time I reached Sarah's building, my imagination had conjured up every possible disaster. Sarah met me at the door, and what I saw made my blood freeze in my veins. Bruises. Dark purple fingerprints wrapped around her throat like some sick parody of jewelry. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut, and there was dried blood on her lower lip. And around her neck, glinting in the harsh hallway light, was my grandmother's ruby necklace. Oh, God! I breathed, reaching toward her face. Oh, sweetheart. Sarah flinched away from my touch, and I saw myself 20 years ago, saw the same shame, the same desperate need to hide and protect and explain away the unexplainable. It's not what it looks like, Sarah said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. I mean, it is, but it's not. David didn't mean. He was drunk, and he was angry about work, and I shouldn't have brought up Patricia. Patricia, the other woman, the one who'd been wearing my necklace while destroying my daughter's marriage. He hit you, I said, and the words felt like broken glass in my throat. Just once. Well, twice. But he was so sorry afterward, Mom. He cried. He gave me this necklace and promised it would never happen again. The necklace. My grandmother's necklace, returned to my daughter as an apology for violence. 4 generations of strong women, and this was what their legacy had become. A peace offering from an abusive husband to his battered wife. I felt something break inside me that night. Something that had been cracking for years, but had finally shattered completely. Not my heart. That had been broken so many times I'd lost count. What shattered was my silence. Take it off, I said. Mom? Take off the necklace, Sarah. Right now. Sarah's hands flew to her throat protectively. But David gave it to me. He said it was a family heirloom, that it belonged to someone who mattered. Someone who mattered. The same words David had used when he'd given the necklace to his mistress. The same words that had been echoing in my head for months like a curse. It is a family heirloom, I said, taking a step closer to my daughter. It belonged to your great-great-grandmother, then to your great-grandmother, then to my mother, then to me. Your father had no right to give it away, and David had no right to use it as a bribe. Sarah's face went white. What are you talking about? The necklace, sweetheart. It's mine. It was stolen from me, passed through men's hands like some kind of currency, and now it's being used to buy your silence about your husband's violence. I watched my daughter process this information, saw the exact moment when understanding dawned in her swollen eyes. The necklace wasn't a gift. It was evidence. Proof of a chain of betrayal that stretched from my marriage to hers, from Harold's casual cruelty to David's calculated abuse. I don't understand, Sarah whispered, though I could tell she was beginning to. Your father gave this necklace to David, I explained gently, probably as payment for some debt or favor. David gave it to his girlfriend, and now, when you've caught him cheating, when you've confronted him about his lies, he's giving it to you as an apology. Like our family history is just some trinket he can pass around whenever he needs to manipulate a woman. Sarah's hands were shaking as she reached behind her neck to unclasp the necklace. When it fell into her palm, she stared at it like it was a snake that might bite her. How long have you known? She asked. About the necklace? A few months? About David's affair? Since you called me at work. No, Sarah said, and her voice was so quiet I had to lean closer to hear her. How long have you known what it's like to be married to a man who hurts you? The question hit me like a physical blow. In all the years of Harold's violence, through all the bruises and broken promises and stolen dreams, not once had I explicitly told my children what was happening. I'd made excuses, covered up evidence, pretended that black eyes came from clumsiness and split lips came from accidents. I'd thought I was protecting them. Instead, I'd taught them that abuse was normal, that love and violence could coexist, that women were meant to suffer in silence. Too long, I whispered. Sarah started crying then, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very center of her being. I pulled her into my arms, feeling the familiar weight of my grandmother's necklace pressed between our bodies, and for the first time in decades, I knew exactly what I had to do. We're going to leave them, I said, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff into open air. Mom, I can't. Where would I go? How would I live? With me, I said simply. We'll figure it out together. What about Dad? What about David? They'll be so angry. I thought about Harold's indifference, about David's violence, about the generations of women who'd worn this necklace and faced their own impossible choices. Let them be angry, I said. We'll be free. That night, we sat at Sarah's kitchen table and made plans. Real plans, with timelines and backup strategies and lists of everything we'd need to start over. I felt like I was waking up from a 30-year sleep, like someone had finally turned on the lights in a room where I'd been stumbling around in the dark. Sarah quit her job the next day and started packing her most important possessions. I opened a new bank account at a different bank, one where Harold had never set foot. We looked at apartment listings online, searching for something small and affordable, and far enough away from Northern Boulevard that we could breathe without wondering when the next shoe would drop. But before we could execute our escape plan, David forced our hand. He came home early from work that Thursday, probably expecting to find Sarah nursing her bruises and counting her blessings that he'd deigned to apologize. Instead, he found her packing boxes, the ruby necklace sitting on the kitchen counter like evidence in a trial. What the hell is this? He demanded. Sarah looked up from the box she was taping shut, and I was amazed by the steadiness in her voice when she answered. I'm leaving you. Like hell you are. David's face was flushing red, and I could see the violence building in his eyes like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. You ungrateful bitch. After everything I've done for you, everything I've given you. You mean after everything you've stolen for me? Sarah held up the necklace, letting it catch the afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window. This belongs to my family, David. It's been in our family for 4 generations. You had no right to give it to Patricia, and you had no right to use it to buy my forgiveness." David's mouth fell open. Who told you about— Does it matter?" Sarah was standing now, and she looked taller somehow, stronger. "What matters is that I know. About Patricia, about the necklace, about the kind of man I married." That's when David's control snapped completely. He lunged across the kitchen, his hands reaching for Sarah's throat. And for a moment I saw my own future. Sarah ending up like me, trapped in a cycle of violence and desperate love, making excuses for a man who saw her as property to be owned and controlled. But Sarah was stronger than I'd been at her age. She sidestepped David's attack, grabbing the heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove and holding it like a weapon. "Don't," she said, and her voice carried a warning that stopped David in his tracks. "Don't you dare touch me again." "You can't leave," David said, and now he sounded like a petulant child instead of a dangerous man. "I love you. I made a mistake with Patricia, but I love you." "Love doesn't leave bruises," Sarah replied, and I felt a surge of pride so strong it nearly knocked me over. "Love doesn't steal. Love doesn't lie and cheat and then expect gratitude for a half-hearted apology." David tried a different approach. "Where will you go? What will you do? You don't have a job anymore. You don't have money. You need me." But Sarah just smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in years. "I have my mother," she said simply, "and that's enough." That weekend, Sarah moved back into my apartment on Northern Boulevard. It was cramped and awkward, a 45-year-old woman sharing a bedroom with her 73-year-old mother like we were roommates in some bizarre sitcom. But it was also liberating in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time in decades, I had an ally. Someone who understood what it felt like to walk on eggshells, to make excuses for inexcusable behavior, to love someone who saw that love as weakness to be exploited. Harold was not pleased with this development. "She can't stay here," he announced on Sarah's second night back. "This is my house, and I didn't agree to take in strays." "She's not a stray," I said quietly. "She's our daughter. Our daughter made her bed when she married that boy. Now she can lie in it." I looked at Harold, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. This man who'd helped create the beautiful, brave woman sitting at our kitchen table, who'd once cried tears of joy when Sarah was born, could now dismiss her suffering with the casual cruelty of someone discussing the weather. "She's staying," I said, and my voice was stronger than I'd heard it in years. Harold's eyes narrowed. "Is that so? And who's going to pay for the extra food, the extra electricity, the extra everything? You think money grows on trees?" "I'll pay for it," Sarah said from the kitchen table. "I'm looking for work. I'll contribute to the household expenses." "Like hell you will. This is my house, and I decide who lives here." That's when I surprised everyone, including myself. "No," I said. "It's our house. Both our names are on the lease. Both our names are on the utility bills. And our daughter is welcome here as long as she needs to be." Harold stood up so fast his chair fell backward, and for a moment I thought he might hit me right there in front of Sarah. But something in my posture must have warned him off, because he just grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. "This isn't over," he said. He was right about that. Harold's campaign to drive Sarah away began the next morning. He turned the television volume up to ear-splitting levels whenever she tried to make phone calls about job applications. He used all the hot water before she could shower. He left messes throughout the apartment that he expected us to clean up. But his cruelest tactic was the psychological warfare, the constant comments about Sarah's appearance, her job prospects, her failed marriage, the heavy sighs whenever she entered a room, the pointed questions about when she planned to get her act together and move on with her life. "You're 35 years old," he'd say over breakfast, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Most women your age have their lives figured out. They don't come running home to mommy every time things get tough." Sarah would flush red and stare at her plate, and I could see her internalizing Harold's poison, starting to believe that maybe she was weak, maybe she was a burden, maybe she'd made a mistake in leaving David. I'd spent decades watching Harold tear me down piece by piece, but watching him do it to Sarah was unbearable. The protective instinct that had been dormant for so long suddenly roared to life, fierce and uncompromising. "Stop it," I said one morning when Harold started in on Sarah about her job search. "Just stop." Harold looked genuinely surprised. "Stop what?" "I'm just being realistic. Someone needs to give her a dose of reality." "Reality?" I stood up from the table, feeling something like electricity surging through my veins. "The reality is that our daughter had the courage to leave an abusive marriage. The reality is that she's strong and smart and deserves better than the lies you're feeding her." "She's a quitter," Harold said, "just like her mother." The words hit their intended target, but instead of crumpling under the familiar weight of his disapproval, I felt something different. Anger. Pure, clean anger that burned through 30 years of accumulated hurt and humiliation. "You're right," I said, and Harold's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "I am a quitter. I should have quit this marriage 20 years ago. I should have quit the first time you hit me, the first time you stole from me, the first time you made me feel like I was worthless." "Mom," Sarah whispered, but I was beyond stopping. And maybe if I had quit, if I'd had the courage to leave when our children were young, they wouldn't have grown up thinking that love looks like violence, that marriage means suffering in silence, that women are meant to accept whatever scraps of affection their men decide to throw their way. Harold's face had gone pale. "Margaret, you're being hysterical." "I'm being honest," I said. "For the first time in 30 years, I'm being completely honest. And the honest truth is that you're not the man I married. You're not the father our children deserved. And you're not the husband I'm going to waste whatever years I have left trying to fix." The silence that followed was deafening. Harold stared at me like I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language, and Sarah's mouth had fallen open in shock. "You don't mean that," Harold said finally. "I do mean it. Every word." Harold looked around our small kitchen, taking in the faded wallpaper and the mismatched chairs and the life we'd built together through decades of compromise and sacrifice and slowly dying dreams. "Where will you go?" he asked. And for the first time in years, I heard genuine uncertainty in his voice. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but anywhere is better than here." That night, Sarah and I made a plan. A real plan this time, with concrete steps and realistic timelines. We'd both find jobs, pool our resources, rent a small place where we could start over without the toxic atmosphere that had poisoned our lives for so long. It felt like planning a prison break. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of job applications and apartment viewings and emotional preparation for the biggest change either of us had ever made. Sarah found work first, a receptionist position at a dental office in Astoria that didn't pay much but offered health insurance and the promise of stability. I was harder to place. At 73, with limited work experience and decades out of the job market, most employers took one look at my application and moved on to younger, more malleable candidates. But Mrs. Chen next door knew someone who knew someone, and eventually I found part-time work cleaning offices in Manhattan, riding the subway into the city 3 mornings a week to empty trash cans and vacuum carpets for people who never saw my face. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was mine. Money I earned without having to ask Harold's permission or explain where every dollar went. For the first time since I'd gotten married, I had my own paycheck, my own bank account, my own small measure of financial independence. We found an apartment too, a tiny 1-bedroom in Elmhurst that cost more than we wanted to pay, but felt like a palace after the suffocating atmosphere on Northern Boulevard. Sarah would take the bedroom, and I'd sleep on the pull-out couch in the living room. It wasn't ideal, but it was ours. The hardest part was telling Michael and Jennifer what was happening. I called Michael first, reaching him at his base in San Diego where he was serving his second tour of duty. "You're leaving Dad?" he asked, and I could hear the disbelief in his voice even through the crackling phone connection. "Yes," I said simply. "I should have done it years ago." "But Mom, you're 73. Where will you live? How will you support yourself?" The same questions everyone was asking, as if age somehow made me less capable of making decisions about my own life. "I'll figure it out," I said. "Sarah and I will figure it out together." Michael was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Are you sure about this? I mean, Dad can be difficult, but he's family. And you've been married so long?" Being married for a long time doesn't make it a good marriage, I said gently. And family doesn't give someone the right to hurt you. Another pause. Did he hurt you, Mom? I mean, really hurt you? I closed my eyes, thinking of all the bruises I'd hidden, all the excuses I'd made, all the nights I'd lain awake wondering if things would ever get better. Yes, I whispered. He hurt me, and he hurt all of you by creating a home where fear was more common than love. When I hung up the phone, I felt lighter somehow, as if speaking the truth out loud had lifted a weight I'd been carrying for decades. Jennifer's reaction was different but equally difficult. She drove up from Boston the weekend before Sarah and I were scheduled to move, ostensibly to help us pack, but really to try to talk us out of leaving. "This is insane," she said, watching Sarah wrap dishes in newspaper. "You're breaking up the family over what? Some arguments? Some rough patches?" "Your sister's husband beat her," I said quietly. "Your father has been beating me for 20 years. These aren't rough patches, Jennifer. This is abuse." Jennifer's face went white. "Dad never… he has a temper, but he never… He did," I said. "I hid it from you kids because I thought I was protecting you. But all I did was teach you that abuse was normal, that women should suffer in silence. But if you leave now, what about Dad? He's getting older, his health isn't great. Who's going to take care of him?" The question hit me like a slap. After 30 years of being Harold's caretaker, his emotional punching bag, his unpaid domestic servant, my own daughter was asking me to sacrifice whatever years I had left to continue serving the man who'd made my life a misery. "He'll take care of himself," I said firmly. "The way I'm going to take care of myself from now on." Jennifer tried a different approach. "What about the apartment? The lease is in both your names. Dad can't afford the rent by himself. That's not my problem anymore." The words felt strange in my mouth, foreign and liberating at the same time. For 30 years, every problem had been my problem. Every crisis had required my intervention. Every mistake had needed my forgiveness. The idea that Harold's financial difficulties might not be my responsibility was revolutionary. "Mom, please," Jennifer begged. "Think about what you're doing. You're 73 years old. You should be thinking about retirement, about enjoying your golden years, not starting over like some teenager." "My golden years?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What golden years? The years I spend walking on eggshells hoping your father won't explode? The years I spend making excuses for his behavior and pretending that constant fear is the same thing as love?" Jennifer started crying then, and I felt my resolve waver. This was my baby, the child I'd rocked to sleep and nursed through childhood illnesses and cheered for at school plays. Her pain was my pain, and seeing her cry felt like tearing my own heart out. But then I looked at Sarah, saw the fading bruises on her neck and the determination in her eyes, and I remembered why we were doing this. "I'm not choosing to break up our family," I told Jennifer gently. "I'm choosing to break a cycle, the cycle of violence and emotional abuse that's been poisoning our relationships for decades. If you can't understand that now, maybe someday you will." The night before we moved, Harold made one last attempt to change my mind. He came home from Murphy's Tavern drunker than I'd seen him in years, stumbling through the apartment like a ghost haunting his own life. "Maggie," he slurred, using the nickname he hadn't spoken in decades. "Maggie, what are we doing? This is crazy." I was sitting at the kitchen table, addressing change of address cards and feeling the surreal weight of dismantling a 30-year marriage one bureaucratic form at a time. "We're not doing anything," I said without looking up. "I'm leaving. You're staying. That's what's happening." Harold collapsed into the chair across from me, and for a moment he looked like the young man I'd married, vulnerable and lost, and desperately in need of someone to take care of him. "I know I haven't been perfect," he said. "I know I've made mistakes, but we can work it out, right? We can get counseling or something." "It's too late for that." "No, it's not. It's never too late. We took vows, Maggie, for better or worse, in sickness and in health. You can't just throw that away." I finally looked up at him, this man who'd once been my whole world, and felt nothing but pity. "You threw it away," I said quietly. "Every time you hit me, every time you stole from me, every time you made me feel worthless and stupid and grateful for whatever scraps of affection you decided to throw my way." You broke our vows a long time ago, Harold. I'm just finally admitting it. Harold started crying then, messy, drunken sobs that would have broken my heart once upon a time. But my heart had been broken and rebuilt so many times that his tears couldn't reach it anymore. I love you, he whispered. I've always loved you. I don't know how to show it sometimes. Love doesn't hurt, I said, echoing Sarah's words from weeks earlier. Love doesn't steal. Love doesn't make someone feel afraid in their own home. I can change. I promise I can change. Maybe you can, I said, standing up and gathering my papers. But I can't wait around to find out. I've wasted enough of my life waiting for you to become the man you promised you'd be. I left Harold crying at the kitchen table and went to bed for the last time in the apartment on Northern Boulevard. Sarah was already asleep on the air mattress we'd bought for our final night, and I lay on my side of the bed I'd shared with Harold for 30 years, listening to the familiar sounds of the city outside our window. Tomorrow, we'd wake up somewhere new. Tomorrow, we'd start the terrifying, exhilarating process of building lives that belonged entirely to us. Tomorrow, we'd find out who we were when we weren't defined by the men who'd hurt us. I fell asleep with my grandmother's ruby necklace clutched in my palm, feeling the weight of 4 generations of strong women who'd somehow found me worthy of their legacy. Moving day dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that makes everything feel soggy and uncertain. Jennifer had driven back to Boston the night before, still angry and hurt, but promising to call once she'd had time to process everything. Michael had sent flowers to our new apartment with a card that said, "Proud of you, Mom. About time." We didn't have much to pack. 30 years of marriage, and what did I have to show for it? A few boxes of books, some clothes that had seen better days, a handful of photographs that documented happier times, and my kitchen utensils. The good ones I'd bought with my own money and guarded fiercely against Harold's casual destruction. Sarah had even less. David had tried to claim everything in their apartment as joint property, conveniently forgetting that most of it had been purchased with Sarah's salary from her old job. She'd taken her clothes, her mother's china, and a few pieces of furniture that held sentimental value, leaving behind the big-ticket items that would have required lawyers and mediators and more drama than either of us had the energy for. The actual move took less than 4 hours. Harold disappeared before the movers arrived, probably to Murphy's Tavern where he could drink away his feelings and tell anyone who'd listen about how his ungrateful wife and daughter had abandoned him in his hour of need. I didn't care. For the first time in decades, Harold's narrative wasn't my responsibility. Our new apartment in Elmhurst was everything our old place wasn't. Bright and clean and filled with possibilities. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow instead of the dingy beige we'd lived with for decades. The windows actually opened, letting in fresh air and sunlight instead of the perpetual gloom that had settled over our lives on Northern Boulevard. Sarah and I spent that first day arranging furniture and hanging pictures, creating a space that reflected our personalities instead of Harold's moods. It felt like playing house, like we were children again, building a fort out of blankets and pillows and declaring it our own private kingdom. That night, we ordered Chinese takeout and ate it sitting on the floor of our empty living room, using paper plates and plastic forks because we hadn't unpacked the good dishes yet. "Are you scared?" Sarah asked as we shared lo mein straight from the container. "Terrified," I admitted, "but also excited." "When was the last time you felt excited about anything?" Sarah thought for a moment. "I can't remember," she said finally. "It's been so long since I looked forward to tomorrow instead of dreading it." We stayed up late that first night, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and sharing dreams we'd kept buried for years. Sarah wanted to go back to school, maybe get a degree in social work so she could help other women in situations like ours. I wanted to travel, to see places outside of New York City, to experience the world beyond the narrow boundaries of survival and fear. They were modest dreams, realistic goals for 2 women starting over with limited resources and unlimited determination. But they were ours, chosen freely without having to consider anyone else's approval or disapproval. I slept better that night than I had in years, lulled by the unfamiliar sounds of a new neighborhood and the even more unfamiliar feeling of safety. The first few months in our new apartment were harder than I'd expected. Learning to live with Sarah as an adult roommate instead of my dependent child required constant negotiations and adjustments. We had different schedules, different habits, different expectations about things like cleanliness and noise levels and personal space. But we worked it out, the way people do when they're committed to making something work. We established routines and boundaries, found our rhythm as two independent women sharing a small space and an even smaller budget. I threw myself into my cleaning job with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone, including myself. The work was physically demanding, but it was also honest and straightforward in a way my life hadn't been for decades. Dirty floors got cleaned. Overflowing trash cans got emptied. Problems had solutions, and effort produced visible results. My supervisor, a no-nonsense woman named Rosa, who'd been managing cleaning crews for 20 years, took me under her wing in ways I hadn't expected. "You're a hard worker," she told me after my first month on the job. "Most women your age, they complain about everything. The early hours, the physical labor, the pay. You just show up and do the work." "I'm grateful for the job," I said simply. Rosa studied me with shrewd eyes that had seen every kind of human drama play out in office buildings and corporate boardrooms. "You running from something?" she asked bluntly. I considered lying, giving her some sanitized version of my story that wouldn't invite questions or judgment. Instead, I told her the truth. "Running towards something," I said. "Finally." Rosa nodded, like this made perfect sense. "Good for you. Life's too short to waste it on men who don't appreciate what they've got." Through Rosa, I met other women who'd reinvented their lives at ages when society expected them to be winding down, not revving up. Maria, who'd started her own catering business at 68 after her husband died and left her with nothing but debt. Janet, who'd gone back to school at 71 to become a paralegal after her children moved away, and she realized she had no idea who she was without them. These women became my mentors and cheerleaders, proof that it was never too late to choose yourself, never too late to demand more from life than mere survival. Sarah was finding her own support system at the dental office where she worked. Dr. Patterson, her boss, was a 60-something woman who'd built her practice from scratch after leaving an abusive marriage 30 years earlier. "She says I remind her of herself," Sarah told me one evening as we shared dinner at our small kitchen table. "She wants to help me apply for financial aid to go back to school." "What would you study?" I asked. "Social work, like we talked about. Or maybe psychology. Something that would let me help other women who are where we were 6 months ago." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Your father would say that's foolish, that we should be focusing on practical things like making money and finding security." "Good thing we don't have to care what he thinks anymore," Sarah replied, and we both smiled. It was true. Harold's opinions had shaped our decisions for so long that living without his constant criticism felt like breathing freely after years of suffocation. We could make choices based on our own values and desires instead of calculating how our decisions might trigger his anger. But Harold wasn't completely out of our lives. He called regularly, usually drunk, sometimes angry, occasionally pleading. I'd changed our phone number twice, but he always managed to track us down, probably with help from well-meaning relatives who thought family should stick together regardless of the circumstances. "This is embarrassing," he slurred during one late-night call. "People are talking, Margaret. They're asking questions about why my wife left me, why my daughter moved out. What am I supposed to tell them?" "Tell them the truth," I suggested. "The truth? The truth is that you abandoned your family. You abandoned your marriage vows. You abandoned everything we built together." "We didn't build anything together," I said quietly. "You built a prison, and I finally found the key." Harold's response was predictable. A string of profanity and accusations, threats and promises, the familiar cycle of abuse that I danced to for 30 years. But now, instead of dancing, I simply hung up the phone. The calls continued for months, becoming less frequent but more desperate as Harold realized that his usual tactics weren't working. He tried guilt, reminding me of good times we'd shared and promises we'd made. He tried anger, calling me every name in his limited vocabulary of cruelty. He tried bribery, promising to change, to get help, to become the husband he should have been all along. None of it worked. I'd moved beyond the reach of his manipulation. found solid ground where his emotional storms couldn't touch me. The turning point came on a Thursday in March, almost exactly 1 year after Sarah had first shown up at my door, with bruises on her neck and my grandmother's necklace around her throat. Harold called in the middle of the afternoon, which was unusual. His voice was different too, not drunk or angry, just tired in a way that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than physical exhaustion. "Margaret," he said, "I need to ask you something." "What?" I was folding laundry in our bright living room, surrounded by the evidence of our new life. Sarah's textbooks, my library books, fresh flowers from the bodega down the street. "Are you happy?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. In all our years of marriage, through all our fights and reconciliations and cold silences, Harold had never asked me about my happiness. It had never seemed to occur to him that my emotional state was something worth considering. "Yes," I said, and realized it was true. "I am happy. Happier than you were with me?" I could have lied, could have softened the blow with diplomatic language about how we'd just grown apart or wanted different things. Instead, I chose honesty. Much happier. Harold was quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, "I'm sorry, Margaret, for everything. I know it's too late, and I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. Not because his apology changed anything. The damage was too deep, too extensive for words to heal, but because it acknowledged a reality he'd been denying for decades. "I hope," Harold's voice cracked, "I hope you find whatever you're looking for." "I already have," I said. That was the last time we spoke. Harold died 6 months later, a heart attack that took him quickly and quietly while he was sleeping. Jennifer called with the news, her voice heavy with a grief I couldn't share. "The funeral is Saturday," she said. "Will you come?" I thought about it for a long moment. About the young man I'd married. About the father he'd been before alcohol and bitterness poisoned his heart. About the 30 years of life we'd shared for better and much worse. "No," I said finally. "I said goodbye to Harold a long time ago." Jennifer was quiet, processing this latest evidence of my transformation from the accommodating mother she'd always known into someone harder to categorize. "He left you the apartment," she said eventually. "Everything's in your name now. You could come back if you wanted to." "I don't want to." "What will you do with it?" I looked around our small apartment in Elmhurst, at the life Sarah and I had built from scratch with nothing but determination and borrowed furniture. "Sell it," I said. "Use the money to do something I've always wanted to do." "Like what?" "I don't know yet. That's the beautiful part." The sale of the apartment on Northern Boulevard took months to complete, buried under layers of bureaucracy and family obligations I'd forgotten existed. But when the paperwork was finally signed and the check deposited into my own bank account, the account Harold had never known about, never had access to, I felt like I'd won some kind of lottery. It wasn't a fortune, just enough to pay off Sarah's student loans and take that trip I'd been dreaming about. But it was mine, earned through decades of survival and sacrifice, and spending it felt like the ultimate act of rebellion against everything Harold had taught me about my own worth. Sarah graduated from her social work program on a sunny Saturday in May, 2 years after we'd fled our old lives and started building new ones. I sat in the front row of the university auditorium, watching my daughter walk across the stage in her cap and gown, and felt a pride so fierce it nearly knocked me over. After the ceremony, as we posed for pictures with Dr. Patterson and Sarah's professors and classmates, a young woman approached us shyly. "Excuse me," she said to Sarah, "but I wanted to thank you. Your presentation in Professor Martinez's class, the one about domestic abuse and family dynamics, it really helped me understand some things about my own situation." Sarah smiled and squeezed the girl's hand. "If you ever need someone to talk to, you know where to find me." I watched this interaction with a heart full of gratitude. This was Harold's legacy too, though he'd never know it. His cruelty had created compassion. His violence had birthed healing. His failures had taught his daughter to succeed in ways he'd never imagined possible. That evening, Sarah and I celebrated at a fancy restaurant in Manhattan, the kind of place Harold would have called pretentious and overpriced. We ordered champagne and lobster and dessert we didn't need, toasting Sarah's achievement and our shared journey from victims to survivors to women who controlled their own destinies. "I have something for you," I said when the waiter brought our coffee. I pulled out a small jewelry box, the same one my mother had used when she'd given me my grandmother's ruby necklace all those years ago. Sarah's eyes widened. "Mom, you don't have to—" "Open it," I said. Inside was the necklace, the rubies catching the candlelight like drops of captured fire. But it looked different somehow. Cleaner, brighter, as if being restored to its rightful place in our family had renewed its power. "I had it cleaned and restrung," I explained. "The jeweler said the rubies were even more valuable than I'd thought. Apparently, your great-great-grandmother had excellent taste." Sarah lifted the necklace from its box with trembling fingers. "Are you sure? This belongs to you. It belongs to all of us," I said. "To every woman in our family who's ever had to be stronger than she thought possible, who's ever had to choose herself when everyone else wanted her to disappear." I fastened the clasp around Sarah's neck, my fingers brushing against skin that had once borne the fingerprint bruises of a violent man. Now there were only the smooth links of a necklace that had survived 4 generations of strong women, waiting patiently to be passed on to the next. "How does it look?" Sarah asked, touching the rubies with reverent fingers. "Like it belongs exactly where it is," I said. And it did. The necklace that had been stolen, pawned, traded, and used as currency in men's games of power and control was finally home where it belonged, around the neck of a woman who understood its true value. That night, as we rode the subway back to Queens, I thought about the journey that had brought us here, the years of abuse and silence, the moment of desperate courage when Sarah had finally left David, the hard work of rebuilding our lives from scratch. It hadn't been easy. There had been nights when we'd questioned our choices, when the loneliness and uncertainty had felt overwhelming. There had been financial struggles and family conflicts, and moments when returning to our old lives had seemed easier than forging new ones. But we'd persevered, because we'd had each other, and because we'd finally learned the difference between surviving and living. Now, at 75, I was living for the first time in decades. Really living, making choices based on joy instead of fear, on possibility instead of obligation. I'd started taking art classes at the community center, discovering that I had a talent for watercolor painting that no one, including myself, had ever suspected. My paintings weren't sophisticated or technically perfect, but they were mine. Expressions of a creativity that had been buried under years of domestic drudgery and emotional exhaustion. I'd also started dating, something that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. George was a widower I'd met at the community center, a gentleman who brought me flowers and held doors and treated me like I was precious instead of disposable. Our relationship was nothing like the passionate intensity of my youth, but it was something I'd never experienced before. Partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. George asked my opinions, remembered my preferences, celebrated my achievements without feeling threatened by them. "You know," he said one evening as we walked through Flushing Meadows Park, "you're the strongest woman I've ever met." "I don't feel strong," I admitted. "Most of the time I feel like I'm making it up as I go along." "That's exactly what makes you strong," George replied. "You keep going even when you don't know where you're headed. You keep choosing hope even when experience has taught you to expect disappointment." I thought about his words that night as I sat in our apartment, surrounded by the life Sarah and I had built together. She was in her bedroom studying for her licensing exam, while I worked on a watercolor of the view from our kitchen window, the busy street below, the apartment buildings stretching toward the horizon, the small slice of sky visible between the buildings. The painting wasn't very good by objective standards, but it captured something important. The view from where we live now. The world is seen by women who'd chosen themselves over sacrifice, who'd chosen possibility over safety, who'd chosen to write their own endings instead of accepting the stories other people had written for them. At 75, I was finally the author of my own life. The phone rang, interrupting my artistic reverie. It was Jennifer, calling from Boston with news that would have devastated me once upon a time. "Mom, I have to tell you something," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "Brian and I are getting divorced." Brian was Jennifer's husband of 15 years, a successful lawyer she'd met in college and married right after graduation. From the outside, they'd seemed perfect together. Attractive, accomplished, financially secure. I'd always envied Jennifer her seemingly effortless happiness. "What happened?" I asked. "He's been cheating on me," Jennifer said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "For years, apparently, with multiple women. His secretary finally told me because she felt guilty about covering for him. My heart broke for my youngest daughter, but underneath the sympathy was something I'd never felt before when one of my children was in crisis. Confidence. Confidence that Jennifer would survive this, that she was stronger than she knew, that this ending could also be a beginning if she chose to see it that way. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I said. "That must be devastating. I feel so stupid," Jennifer sobbed. "Everyone probably knew except me. I've been living a lie for God knows how long." "You weren't lying," I said firmly. "You were being faithful and trusting, qualities that shouldn't be punished but often are." "What am I going to do? I haven't worked in years. I don't have my own money, my own anything. Everything we have is in Brian's name." I heard echoes of my own fears in Jennifer's voice, the terror of starting over, of discovering who you are when you're not defined by your relationship to a man. "You'll figure it out," I said. "It won't be easy, but you'll figure it out." "How do you know?" "Because you're my daughter," I said simply, "and we're stronger than we look." Jennifer came to stay with us while her divorce was finalized, sleeping on our fold-out couch and slowly remembering who she'd been before she'd become Brian's wife. It was crowded with 3 women in our small apartment, but it was also healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. For the first time in decades, all 3 generations of women in our family were living together by choice rather than obligation. We were allies instead of competitors, supporting each other instead of tearing each other down. Jennifer threw herself into job hunting with the same determination Sarah had shown during her return to school. Within 6 months, she'd found work with a nonprofit organization that advocated for women's rights, using her business skills to help other women navigate divorces and custody battles and financial independence. "It's funny," she said one evening as we shared dinner around our small table. "I always thought I was so different from you and Sarah. I thought I'd figured out how to have a perfect marriage, a perfect life." "There's no such thing as a perfect life," Sarah said gently. "There's just life, with all its messiness and disappointment and unexpected joy." "I know that now," Jennifer replied. "I wish I'd known it sooner." "You knew it when you needed to know it," I said. "That's how these things work." That Christmas, our first as a complete family in years, Michael flew in from California with his wife and twin daughters. The apartment was chaos. 5 adults and 2 energetic 7-year-olds crammed into space meant for 2 people. But it was joyful chaos, filled with laughter and stories and the kind of easy affection I'd forgotten was possible. Michael pulled me aside on Christmas Eve, while the others were watching holiday movies and arguing over popcorn flavors. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not understanding what you were going through with Dad. For thinking you were being dramatic when you left him. For not seeing what was right in front of me for all those years." I studied my son's face, seeing Harold's features softened by kindness and maturity Harold had never achieved. "You were a child," I said. "It wasn't your responsibility to fix our marriage or protect me from your father. But I could have supported you more when you finally left. Instead, I questioned your decision, made you feel like you were breaking up the family. You were protecting yourself," I said. "That's what children do, even grown children. They try to make sense of their parents' choices within their own understanding of how the world works." Michael hugged me then, and I felt the last piece of guilt and regret finally fall away. My children hadn't chosen the dysfunction that had shaped their early years, but they'd all found ways to heal from it, to create healthier relationships and stronger boundaries in their own lives. That night, as I watched my family sleeping peacefully throughout our small apartment, Sarah and Jennifer sharing the bedroom, Michael and his family claiming the living room, grandchildren in sleeping bags like this was some kind of elaborate sleepover, I felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This was what happiness looked like. Not the dramatic passion of youth or the desperate compromises of a failing marriage, but the quiet satisfaction of having made it through the hard parts to somewhere worth being. I thought about Harold, Wondered if he'd ever experienced this kind of peace in the months before his death. I hoped he had. Hoped he'd found some measure of redemption in his final days. Some understanding of what he'd thrown away with his anger and violence and need for control. But his peace, or lack thereof, wasn't my responsibility anymore. I'd learned to carry my own happiness and let other people carry theirs. On New Year's Eve, George and I went to Times Square like tourists, joining the crowds of people waiting for the ball to drop and the calendar to turn toward another year of possibilities. "Any resolutions?" he asked as midnight approached. "Just one," I said, thinking of the ruby necklace hanging safely in Sarah's jewelry box, of the art supplies waiting on my kitchen table, of the family I'd rebuilt through will and stubborn love. "What's that?" "To keep choosing myself," I said. "Every day, in every decision, to remember that I matter." The ball dropped, the crowd cheered, and George kissed me with the gentle reverence of a man who understood that love was a privilege, not a right. And as we made our way home through the celebrating crowds, I thought about the women who would watch this story unfold, who would recognize themselves in my journey from victim to survivor to self-actualized human being. It's never too late, I wanted to tell them. It's never too late to say no, to leave, to choose yourself over the comfortable misery of a life that's slowly killing your spirit. It's never too late to reclaim what was stolen from you, whether it's a ruby necklace or your sense of self-worth or the simple belief that you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. It's never too late to start over, to discover who you are when you're not busy being who everyone else needs you to be. The ruby necklace that had traveled through 4 generations of strong women had taught me its most important lesson, that survival isn't enough. That endurance, while admirable, isn't the highest aspiration for a human life. True strength lies in knowing when to leave, when to say no, when to choose the uncertain path of authenticity over the familiar prison of other people's expectations. I learned this lesson at 73, but the lesson itself has no expiration date. It's available to anyone brave enough to claim it, patient enough to rebuild from scratch, strong enough to believe they deserve better than scraps of affection from people who see love as a transaction rather than a gift. My grandmother's necklace now rests around Sarah's neck, waiting patiently for the day she'll pass it on to the next generation of strong women in our family. Its rubies have seen violence and theft, manipulation and betrayal, but they've also witnessed courage and liberation, the triumph of authentic love over toxic obligation. The necklace endures, as strong women always do, carrying the stories of those who came before and the promises of those yet to come. And me? At 76, I'm still learning, still growing, still choosing myself every single day. I paint in the mornings, work in the afternoons, and spend my evenings with people who see me as whole and valuable and worthy of respect. I travel when I want to travel, speak up when I have something to say, and sleep peacefully in a bed that belongs only to me. I am, for the first time in my adult life, exactly who I was meant to be. This isn't the end of my story. It's the beginning of the chapters I get to write myself, free from the constraints of other people's scripts and expectations. And if you're listening to this and recognize yourself in my journey, if you see your own fingerprint bruises in my daughter's story, if you feel the weight of your own stolen inheritance, whether it's jewelry or dreams or simple human dignity, know this: you are never too old, never too trapped, never too dependent to choose yourself. Your story doesn't have to end with endurance. It can end with triumph. Have you lived this story? Or do you know someone who has? The statistics tell us that domestic abuse affects women of all ages, all backgrounds, all circumstances. You're not alone in this struggle. And you're not alone in the courage it takes to change your life. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters, your voice matters, your journey toward healing and wholeness matters. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that it's never too late to choose yourself, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Every person who hears this message, every woman who realizes she deserves better than the crumbs of affection she's been accepting, every family that breaks the cycle of violence and control, that's how we change the world. One story at a time. Thank you for listening to mine.